You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everybody and welcome back to episode 43 of Arsenal Pass. We're back again with our part 2 of our predictions for Everfest's impact on the classic constructed meta. How each hero looks to be shaping up in that new meta, our deck ideas, and finally giving a grade to each hero based on what they got in the set. Anyway, Hayden, first as always, you're weak in Flesh and Blood, sir.
I didn't even get my intro. You just dropped it completely. That's fine.
That's so true. That's actually tried on. Think about that. 43 episodes, and that's the first time I've done that.
Yeah, you've missed it up.
I've never missed it, and we've run it back. I almost went a full year. I almost got to 52, but I didn't.
You've missed it now. I'll move on. Good week in Flesh and Blood. So the week before we played a lot of drafts, of course. Welcome to Wraith Farewell events. This week, Everfest has been out. So, cracked some packs, cracked some cases, opened some good stuff, which is cool. And then played an Armory last night. Didn't get to play any Everfest before that. I went away for the weekend. Got a bit of a getaway, which is awesome. And then, played an Armory last night. And playing a couple more this week. Just going to try and play some Everfest. And it's crazy. I feel like we're going to talk again today about Everfest's impact on Classic Constructed. I feel like we're not even 7 days into Everfest. And I already feel like some stuff is starting to shape up in terms of like decks we're seeing, things that people are talking about, the discourse in the community of what Everfest impact is on Classic Constructed, which classes are winners, which classes are losers. And I think if we went back and redid last week's episode, we'd even have like a few different things to talk about. So I'm excited that we're doing the bulk of the classes today, and we're gonna breeze through them, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be a thick one. So my week in Flesh and Blood, back to testing every day. So we had the hiatus in the off season. I played a little bit during then, but now back to the everydays. Been testing a lot of Prism. And it's really good, of course. Everybody knows that, but I actually don't think it's going to be as dominant as people think it will be. Yeah, well, I think it's going to be heavily represented on week 1 because, like, I was talking about this with Tim on Time of the Round yesterday. It's like weekend 1 of ProQuest is really predictable. Like, you might think, like, wow, that deck is so popular, a lot of people are just going to try to target it. With the current player base in Flesh and Blood, they tend to just play that deck. Definitely some people will tend to target it, but yeah, vast majority will be Prism, and actually I think a lot of events will be won by Prism. This is, there are some variables here where if Bravo Star of the Show gets on stream and wins some games, that could also become a more popular deck, but whatever tends to be the community sentiment translates really well to that week 1 of ProQuest.
Well, you're bringing the discussion for later and early. I think I'm going to save my piece for once we get into Prism. I think there's a bit of both on that regard. I think one thing I will say is I think the Flesh and Blood, especially the competitive community, is like evolving to, as we saw through like some of the national seasons, that people react a lot faster than maybe they had previously. Still there is that time, that sort of window you're talking about, right, where like the prevailing decks come through, but I think communication's getting better between players and whatnot as well. And like there was an event streamed on the weekend, I think it was like a winner case event, where like a Bravo Star of the Show deck went 8-0, right, and now people are aware of that list, and so there's things like that happening a bit faster. I think we're moving. It's like the information age of Flesh and Blood is coming about a bit faster, but. Anyway, should we let's talk about a little bit of news before we get into this big, chunky sort of main topic, which is going to take up the majority of this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
So, Calling Europe has been announced. There's going to be a Calling in Europe. We don't have any other details other than that, but I have heard that they are dropping on I think it's the 10th of February my time, so it must be 9th of February for most of North America and Europe. So we're going to get some details of when that's happening, where that's happening, what it looks like. We do know there's a Battle Hardened happening in the UK. I believe that's in the next few weeks, I think, or next month after the ProQuest season. But then we're going to have a calling. So I don't know, predictions, Brendan. Where do you think it would make sense to put this calling for Europe? Do you think it's surely pre-Pro Tour, right?
I think so.
Well, that's very soon turnaround. So maybe it's post-Pro. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, you're right. So that's funny. I was about to comment. I was like, yeah, Europe's a pretty big continent. European ProQuest. I mean, that could be in a lot of places. Yeah, I have no idea. Do they just run it back in Utrecht? I think that it's probably decently dependent on what the COVID situation looks like in those countries. And yeah, I mean, because obviously that's why Utrecht was canceled. So I have no idea because I'm not up to date with those situations, but I think that's going to be like the main contributing factor. Just if they can put it somewhere where it's very likely to actually kind of follow through and people are able to play.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of bummed because back in 2020, 2021, I had a lot of flexibility in my schedule to do those callings, like to go to Europe for a couple weeks or a month or New Zealand for a couple weeks. And right now, with my current situation, it looks like for the next about 3 months or 2.5 months, I'm not going to have that flexibility. I might after, but yeah, I hope I don't miss out on too many awesome events.
Yeah, I'd love to hit Europe up some callings. I think we talked about this previously. Hopefully, there's a couple in a sequence. Yeah, I mean, shout out to the Polish community. Hopefully, maybe it's in Poland. I mean, there's a lot of good players in Poland. They've kind of repped the game very early on. Maybe they get a calling. I think UK might be a safe bet, but anyway, we'll see. By the time this pod drops, we might have the announcement, or it'll be coming shortly after. So yeah, be interesting to see what we get for the first European calling. Long overdue for sure.
I love Poland. I would be so bummed if I missed the Polish calling.
Yeah, I've never been. Want to go.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
As for the news, I just want to give a shout out to Legend Story Studios and the Fab TCG website. Hit me up for an interview after the Australian Nationals, and thank you. Very nice softball questions and nice interview. We talked about community and just journeys through Flesh and Blood and how the game has changed over the years, and a little bit about Australian Nationals and testing and the event itself. And it was a really cool experience to sit down with Nicola and talk about that. So thank you for the nice interview. They didn't hit me with any hardball questions, thankfully. So
yeah, I actually had a listener question on Twitter. It said, "Whose interview is better, Brendan's or LSS's?"
Oh, good question. Very different. Brendan was very hardball. LSS, we talked a bit more about Flesh and Blood, so different styles. Gameplay. We've got another gameplay that's going to be up by the time that this podcast drops. We're recording a day early today, aren't we? So the calling announcement is going to be out by the time the podcast drops, from the information I have. And also our gameplay, second Everfest gameplay, is going to be out. I sleeved up Bravo at the start of the show, which was pretty exciting. Very much a week one list, but I had a ton of fun playing it. And Brendan, what did you play?
Yeah, so I went with kind of the traditional meta pick as usual. Put Hayden on the hard deck now. I played Kano. So, I think that there's at least once a year, Hayden and I one of us has to play Kano that year. So I took one for the team and I absolutely destroyed Hayden. So go check out that video.
You're waiting till Kano is much more in favor, aren't you? Look, I'm really excited about the Kano cards, and we're going to talk about Wizard, I think, first or second up today. So, yeah, it was a cool game. Check it out. It's up on YouTube now as the pod drops. And anything else to add, Brendan? Time in the round. What's been happening with time in the round? We've got a time around this week, I believe, with Tim Bunn. Is that right?
That's correct. So the classic plug of time in the round, the news section. We do have Tim Bunn this week. One of my favorite people. You might recognize that last name. Another man by the name of Zach Bunn is his brother. Pretty prevalent in the community. We actually had him on Time of the Round as well. So talk to his brother Tim. Great conversation. Talk about some hot topics. Tim's first time on Arsenal Pass. Gave him some hard balls, specifically around organized play. So you can go see Tim's responses. And if you disagree with anything said in the podcast, just light him up on Twitter. And yeah, just want to shout out to the Arsenal Pass Patreon. Thank you all so much for supporting us. And if you are interested in checking that out, we do have tons of extra content on there, including deck techs, deck guides, as well as extra podcasts, and a few creative things like once a month. Sometimes I remember we did commentary over the Hong Kong Nationals final in terms of like analyzing it from deep level, turn by turn. That was really cool.
Yep, definitely check it out. And just no Commander Cookout this week. So Brendan, don't worry about firing up the grill. We're going to leave that for this week because we have a lot to get through with Everfest and Classic Constructed. We do have a backlog of questions. Thank you to everyone who sent some questions, and we will definitely try and get through those. Maybe we will do a couple of questions one episode where we've got a bit of a shorter main topic to catch up on those. But if you do want to get your question in, you can tweet at us. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below. Just let us know it's a Commander Cookout question, so we make a note of that. You can hit us up on email, arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. And if you are one of our patrons, we do have the Discord with a Commander Cookout channel where you can drop your questions ready for the grill.
Awesome. Well, like you said, it's going to be a thick one today. So just give everybody a refresher on the grading system we'll be using for all the heroes.
Yeah, so if you didn't listen to the pod last week, I recommend going back and checking out at least the main topic of the pod, which is about 45 minutes in, because we did have some robust discussion, which we got some feedback on at the start of that pod. But basically, last week we started to break down Everfest and Classic Constructed. We talked about Mechanologist, we talked about Guardian, and we talked about Runeblade. So, three of the really big ones heading into this new format, especially, of course, Guardian and Runeblade with the heroes. They have, 3 heroes apiece now. But yes, the grading system. So we talk through each of the heroes, talk about the classes and the heroes, what we think is going to be good in Everfest, where they've come from, the changes, what we expect to see archetype-wise, what we would play as well. And then we give a bit of a grading at the end of how we think they're shaping up for Everfest Classic Constructed. And I just want to recap this. And I apologies, I don't think I was very clear about our grading system last week, and people just thought we're probably throwing stuff out there. But basically, if we're giving them an A, we think they've had a massive boost. This is now one of the more powerful classes with a lot of tools and could be among the decks to beat in the format. A B is, they got some amount of boost. They stayed the same if they were near the top, and they should be a contender through the season. C, they got very little or maybe gotten worse as a top deck, and they might see play, but they might find a spot in the meta just depending on what's happening. They could be a bit of a meta call, right? And then D is they got actively worse or stayed bad. Very few tools given to them and have been kind of left behind with Everfest and might have little to no impact on the Everfest meta. And of course, we could be wrong about these, but those are our predicted grades. Let's kick it off, Brennan, with the one I wanted to talk about last week, but we're going to talk about Brute to start with. So, of course, we have Rhinar and Livia, the 2 Brute heroes. And if we talk a little bit about where those heroes were in the last meta, maybe let's start with Livia. Where do you think Livia was in the last meta?
Probably somewhere near the dumpster. The thing about Brute is I think that Brute, at least in Class Constructed, often exist in the middle, right? The middle between defensive and hyper aggressive. And I think that those decks were not able to flourish both in Monarch, but particularly in Tales of Aria. I think that was a very polarizing format between hyper aggressive and hyper defensive. So I would say that those Levia in particular, we haven't played too much with Levia since Monarch, but I assume it only got worse. And yeah, it was a tough spot for our girl. What do you think? Because I remember there was a time back in Monarch when you were actually thinking about taking Levia instead of Chain.
Well, I think, I know had I had more Road to Nationals, I would have taken Levia to one of those. Unfortunately, my Road to Nationals season got pretty much canned, but I thought Levia was really good in that format just because of how aggressive that deck is and how well it played into Prism and to the Guardian builds of that time. But the tough thing for Livia in the last format is that Briar was around, right? It was a deck that did the aggression better. Livia doesn't disrupt as much as Rhinar, which is tough. And you can struggle into these. I think you can struggle into these ultra sort of controlling or long game decks if they know how to play into you. I think if they don't, you can walk them. But once they've probably tested that matchup, it becomes very difficult. So I think Livia was in a really tough spot. I think the deck still has Explosion. I actually played against Olivia last night at an Armory, and just there's still a lot of power coming out of that Livia deck. I think Rhinar is an interesting one of where that's been, and I think I've talked about this. I really wanted to play Rhinar in the last format. I think Briar made that impossible. I think it had really good matchups into Ultim, and maybe could have even been a good call at the end of the season with how much Prism we saw. I think you still have good matchups there, but ultimately, this deck that was just too aggressive, and Rhinar is a deck that struggles with aggression kind of in any form, to be honest. It deals with it worse than Livia, but deals with disruption sort of styled or disrupting control decks a lot more. So kind of an interesting spot. So that's kind of where they were, right? They were kind of out of the meta. They were maybe you would take Rhinar if it was the right sort of event for it, but probably you weren't playing either in a competitive event. So in terms of, I guess, we kind of talked about what they're strong against and what they're weak against. Rhinar plays really well into these decks that want to play defense reactions, want to disrupt turns, want to set up, cycles. So it has been good into old times, has been, reasonable into Bravo, depending on the build, has been, OTK Viscerai, for instance, like that's a very good matchup for Rhinar. So, and then on the flip side, Livia plays well into decks that want to kind of have a consistent game plan. Like traditionally, Livia's played really well into dash, for instance. So if we talk about cards they've gotten, though, let's move on to Everfest. What have they actually gotten? So you want to start with big swing big? I keep saying big swing big.
Yeah, I mean, this one definitely. I don't think it's up for debate how good this card is. This one, I think we can all agree that this is the good card that Brute got. So swing big. This is Brute attack action, majestic. It costs 2, swings for 8, blocks for 3. If swing big doesn't hit, the defending hero creates a quicken token when the combat chain closes. So you're getting punished if this is fully blocked. But I mean, this on the tail end of a Blood Rush Bellow turn, it's pretty good. And also forcing your opponent to block 8 at any time, especially in the metas that we're used to, which are generally more aggressive decks. Yeah, it's a very good card.
Well, so best case scenario to block this out, right, is like an unmovable. Yeah, red unmovable from Arsenal. That's 2 cards. So you start your turn with 3. How effective is that quicken token? Like even if this does get defended out, like how effective is that quicken token going to be? What you're probably looking at more likely is someone throwing their whole hand at this at the end of a chain, maybe. But if it's in Reiner, do they even have the cards to defend with? Getting that quicken, and then later on, 2 turns down the track, using that quicken token because they defended out on that turn. Maybe they keep their whole hand the following turn. So that's a real thing that can happen. But the tempo that this can swing, I like that it's in the name, is quite a lot. And just 2 for 8, like that is a pushed effect, right? Like 2 for 8 is well above rate with no downside, with the downside that it has.
I think a lot of us wouldn't have been surprised if this card didn't block.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's on that power level, so super, super good.
It's majestic, though. So, yeah, I think Swing Big slots into Reiner immediately. I think, as you say, it's the best on a Blood Rush turn, but it's also just super efficient, even on a 2-card hand. It does more than any 2-card hand in your deck can do currently. Yeah, Livia, I think it probably still goes in just the power level, right? You've just got to try and find the spots for it, but it's so good off... it's funny, it kind of competes with Graveling Growl, I think, and it depends on what your deck looks like. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Wild Ride. I'm really high on this card. I think this is probably the next card, and to be honest, in my opinion, the only other card that Brutes have gotten in this set that I think is competitively viable. So Wild Ride is the 2-cost at red. It attacks for 6, so it goes down to 5/4 for blue and yellow. It doesn't defend, and it says when you attack with Wild Ride, draw a card, then discard a random card. If it has 6 or more attack, Wild Ride gets go again. So very similar to Pulping, but in that we have... there's no, you can't lose the go again, but you don't get the dominate. I really like this card because Pulping was really tough to play into decks that could or might run defense reactions against you, especially if you're playing Reiner. And if you're playing it in Livia in particular, often players are going to play defense reactions into you because you don't have the intimidate mechanic like you do with Reiner. So I think Wild Ride is actually a bit of it's a side grade, but maybe a slight upgrade on Pulping in the types of decks that you want to play it in. So I really like this card, particularly in Reiner with a prism meta. So
yeah, I mean on this one I have to just totally agree with you. There's not really much more to say. This in Reiner is particularly good. How many of these cards you can run in Reiner at 0 block, I think is a somewhat meta dependent, but looks like it's going to be easier than it used to be. That's for sure.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the decks in the moment and when you might play them. But I think if you're looking at meta calls, Reiner might start to look a little bit different, and you might be playing more of these no defense cards because you might be playing into a meta where you're not expecting as many aggressive decks. So that's an interesting thing to consider as well. But I like this at red and blue in particular. What about Rolling Thunder, Brennan? What's your opinion on this?
So I initially thought this card was... I was actually pretty excited about it, and Hayden brought me back to earth a little bit. That being said, when we reevaluated that it can hit the weapon as well, I think that it's good, but I don't think it's exceptional. I don't know if you're playing it in literally every single Brute deck. What do you think, Hayden?
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, I'm going to consider like the upside. So the fact that this is a 1-cost that can give you +6 average, you're going to be hitting a 3, right? 3 to 4. Mm-hmm. It gets go again, hits the weapon like you say, it defends 3. These are all good positive things, right? The downside is this isn't a 6 attack, so I think in Reiner, for instance, especially with the new cards that you probably want to play, this gets worse. This is a bit of maybe an issue. And then the fact that, if you are rolling 1s, 2s, 3s, it's worse than an average card in your deck, and it already has anti-synergy. So I think this is this really fits. This Majestic has been given as a slot to this mechanic of rolling dice and getting the benefit, right? Like the is it high rollers and of course the skull crashers, the new equipment. I think these all kind of sit in a package together, which is more of a KO package, to be honest. But I think there's probably either a Levy or a Reinhardt deck you can play here that's very high rolly. It's kind of in the name, right? High rollers. It's not something I'm interested in from a competitive standpoint, but you know what? It could be a deck to play and could be interesting to look at. But yeah, I mean, maybe in a club build, this could be playable in terms of, you know, what it gives you on the weapon. But I just think it doesn't do the things that you want. It doesn't tick the boxes that you want it to tick. So yeah, I think this is a bit more of a KO card personally.
Yeah, in the context of a lot of these cards being sort of gambly, that's a word. This is the one that I think is the most playable.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, it is what it is. Brute. Yeah, we'll talk about it pretty soon here, but Brute got the short end of the stick. So next is going to be Skull Crushers. Hey, now I don't think we need to say too much about this card, but I have a question for you. Is this card good enough to play in a standard Reinhardt deck?
So it's possibly an upgrade on Iron Rock Gauntlet if you want that into an aggressive meta. But it's kind of anti-synergistic because you want Gambler's Gloves in your deck where you're rolling dice, and this fits your arm slot. So I don't really want any part of this, to be honest. In class constructor decks, I think, unfortunately, I just don't think there's enough ways. So there's the deck we just talked about, right? That could be something you may be playing class constructed. Maybe you want to play that kind of thing. It has no interest to me. I just don't. I think there's too much variance involved. Like now you're starting to really back into the variance, which I don't want to do, and I just don't think the upside is high enough to be doing that. So no.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is. I thought Brute was the variance-based class. No, I'm kidding. Well, so next is Bear Fangs. Well, yeah. Well, maybe now it is.
Yeah. People are now.
Next is Bear Fangs. So it's a 6 attack. I think it costs. Does it cost 2, Hayden? Yeah, it costs 2. It says when you attack with Bear Fangs, draw a card, then discard a random card. If a card has 6 or more attack is discarded this way, Bear Fangs gains +2. So this, in the best case scenario, would be a 2 for 8. You know, potentially Reinhardt. You also get the Intimidate on top of that. So similar to Swing Big without Swing Big's quote-unquote downside, which I don't think is too bad of a downside. And of course, does not block. So leaning into that archetype a little bit more with the 0 block or no block value, if I may say, because that's more accurate, of Brute cards. What is your opinion on this one, Hayden?
Yeah, this card's growing on me more and more as I look at it. I still haven't found the way I want to play this card because they're just the no defense cards. I think to your point earlier about how many you want to play is tough. And I really like Wild Ride and what that's doing with potentially a deck that goes a bit wider, activates claws, and can put pressure on Prism decks, especially if Prism's been big in the format. I do like this card though. The fact that this trigger. So we talked about a 2-card hand before, right? With Swing Big, where it's like pitch a yellow, play Swing Big, come in for 8. Well, this can do the same thing, but it gets an Intimidate trigger. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have the downside of the Quicken. Like that's actually huge. This card is really strong, but it doesn't defend. And how many of those cards can you play? But I do really like Bear Fangs. I think this is one of the better cards that you can play off, say, like a Sand Sketch plan, for instance. You know, if you've got the 2 actions, because you're coming in for 8, so that the power ratio gets higher as opposed to when it didn't so much in the past. Like, you know, often it was only cards like Massacre or on Blood Rush Bellows turns where your cards started to get above rate. Whereas now you have something like Bear Fangs or Swing Big. So I could see not playing Wild Ride and playing this and instead of it, and playing a bit more of like a Blood Rush Bellows focus deck and maybe less reliant on the go again, and having this as like your 2-card hand and blocking with your other 2 cards, for instance. So yeah, this card's growing me a lot. I like it. I think I like the red. I'm less keen on the blue and the yellow.
Mm-hmm. So next up is going to be Talisman of Recompense.
Oh, here we go.
Not a Brute card, but seems to go well in Brutes, in our opinion. So it's an item, of course. It says, go again whenever you pitch a card. If you would gain exactly 1 resource, instead destroy Talisman of Recompense, gain 3. So this is, I feel like this item is playable in a few decks, depending how many items you can put in your deck. But that is a powerful effect, and I can hear how excited you are because it is particularly powerful in Brute.
So so you might ask why, right? Like, why is this good in Brute? Well, one of the issues that Brute often has is that you go for your Blood Rush Bellows turn, or you are lining up maybe, you know, a strong quad Intimidate turn. But the problem is you do have reds in your deck, right? And we talk about reducing variance in Brute, and that's like the dice rolling and the discard mechanic. But you need to play some of these strong red cards, and as much as I want to play as many yellows as I can in my deck, you need reds. But as soon as you start to get over like 20 reds, I think sometimes you get these hands where you're like, okay, Bloodrush Bellows, draw double red, and it's like, oh, this is terrible. I'm not able to swing the claws. I'm not able to get max effect. Talisman fixes some of those hands, right? It fixes some of that variance by allowing you to have this in play. It has Go Again, which is huge. So you can play this with Go Again, still get in with your attack with a weapon or whatever, or attack with, maybe a pack hunt or whatever it is for the turn, off a 3-card hand. But then later in the game, it's going to be worth a lot to you. It's going to be worth more than a card probably, because it's going to allow you to continue with, say, a Bloodrush Bellows turn, etc. So I'm really high on this card. It's also yellow. So it pitches if you need it to in a way that's good for your deck. So many 2 costs, your weapon 2 costs, of course. So I do think the issue though with this card is it again doesn't defend, and this is like a limit of how many of these cards you can play. So where I think this fits in more so is in this kind of like more mid-rangey deck that doesn't want to be as aggressive with Wild Rides. Maybe you play Bare Fangs as your only card that doesn't defend, plus you play this and you do away with, in the past, Energy Potions being like a card I've been a big fan of. But this card says Go Again on it. And I think it does a very similar job. So yeah, pretty big on Talisman and Recompense.
Yeah, I mean, for sort of immediate meta relevance, I think it's pretty good against something like Prism, where the defense value in your cards is a little bit less relevant, and this ability will be relevant. So I think it's kind of a free roll in that matchup, which should be a popular matchup.
I don't know how keen I am on it in Livia, to be honest. Whereas a card like maybe Bare Fangs, I'm okay with in Livia, although you have so many other cards. I just feel like Livia got like nothing from the set, to be honest, apart from maybe Swing Big and potentially Wild Ride, depending on the deck you wanted in. But I think the other cards are more Rhinar, to be honest.
To be honest, I genuinely forget that Livia is a hero sometimes. It feels like she's that disregarded. So new archetypes in Everfest. Hayden, I'll go first. There's obviously a pretty apparent topic of a new archetype that I like to call YOLO Brute, which, to be honest, I kind of hate it. I think a lot of people kind of hate it too. It's cool, I guess. Like I felt like we had that with KO, and it was like enough, right? It's like, yeah, if you want to go do that, you can go do that in this casual format, and it can be fun sometimes. But like when this much set design is devoted to this archetype that. I mean, the general reception seems to not be good. I know from like Hayden and I's perspective, we definitely hate it, but I could see some people liking this. I felt like Brute like I said earlier, got the short end of the stick, and I'm not too happy with YOLO Brute. But at least they got Swing Big and potentially Wild Ride and stuff like that. Hayden, I know that this one's going to be close to home. So tell me what's going through your head.
I feel like LSS have done one over here because everyone goes, oh, it's the variance class, and LSS goes, hold my beer. Watch this. Because, now you have this archetype that really is like just back into variance. And of course we had KO already, which was, the hero ability was like a variant role, but has a pretty big upside. So yeah, a little bit disappointed, really disappointed for fans of Livia out there who want to play Livia. I think been a little bit shortchanged this set, but I do think like Livia's issue in the last format wasn't the card pool and the decks you could play. It was like the format. So, maybe Livia actually ends up being stronger, all things considered, when you net it out. Rhinar, I think there's a couple of cool cards. I think the overall deck hasn't changed much, though. When we talk about archetypes, I don't think there's much in there. So if I was to play this right now, if I was to play Rhinar or Livia, if I was looking at Livia, I'd look at something very similar to what I've been playing in the past. I think the meta's slowed a little bit, so I would definitely be pretty high on playing like the toolbox elements with Shadow Blasphemous, etc., which I already was high on. I think that is the biggest strength you have with Livia, and I think not playing it is tough, but I understand why people did it because of the format we were in. And then with Rhinar, so my initial thoughts was I would go for, if I'm targeting a Prism and Guardian meta, I would probably focus on cards like Wild Ride and some pulping for the Prism matchup to be able to go wide and pressure shields, and then push damage and pop auras with your final attack. So you're looking to multiple attack most turns. If Prism ends up being good but isn't the bulk of the meta, maybe there's a step back somewhere, and the deck I might look at is something I was just talking about before with like, the only cards I don't defend are like Bare Fangs maybe, and I play Swing Big, maybe I get Talisman Recompense in there, and I'm playing a bit more of a mid-range deck, and maybe we're preying on the Guardians and some of the other more mid-range decks. So yeah, unfortunately I think Brute's in a bit of a tough spot still, and the archetypes haven't changed, so it's about working within probably the existing bases we had, and maybe there's something else in there we just haven't discovered yet, and that would That would be cool, but I don't particularly feel confident about it.
Important thing you touched on there, which is Brute being a meta-dependent class. Can Brute exist to be relatively competitive, or more than relatively competitive, in just like a normal meta, right? Or does it have to be like this kind of control-dominated meta or prism-dominated meta where it just really shines because of its either intimidate factors, evasion, or its ability to pop Phantasm? I'm not sure. Probably, right? I think that one of the biggest limiter on Brute was decks like Chain and decks like Briar. They were extremely punishing to Brute. So with those maybe having less of a representation of the meta, maybe there's more room for Brute. And of course, there is the Prism, what would you call it, epidemic that's going to be happening here on ProQuest Week 1. It's definitely going to be there. There's going to be a lot of Prism players. I have no doubt in my mind. Obviously, Bravo, star of the show, his stock has risen a bit, and a lot of players are looking to probably play that as well. But I think that Prism for a lot of events will be the most popular deck, and we theoretically Rhinar shines against that.
Yeah. I just want to go back to what you talked about before. I think Brute it's a meta call. I would play Rhinar in this ProQuest season, and if I feel like it's the right week to do it, I probably will. I will take any opportunity I can to play Rhinar, of course. But I think into an open field, it's really tough because one of the hard things about Rhinar is like slots are really limited in this deck. It's actually, I find it tough to build this deck in a way where I can match up well against the field. I feel like with Rhinar, I often want to be targeting decks. So if I know it's a Prism and Guardian meta, cool. I think there's a deck list that I could have for that, and I'd feel pretty confident taking it to an event. If I think there's going to be 20% Prism, 15% Guardian, and then 15% Rune Blades, there's some ninjas out there. If there's a whole wider field, I feel way less confident about it. With that being said, let's drop some grades. I think for me, Rhinar ends up at a C. I think pretty flat to where we were previously. Gets a couple of upgrades, but doesn't change the way it plays, and it's really still going to be meta dependent, which I think it was earlier. How well you can use Intimidate. Livia, sorry team. I think it's like a D plus. Livia has, I think, gotten nothing from this basically, and although maybe the meta serves it a little bit better, I just think it's going to struggle to have any presence in this competitive meta heading forward in Everfest. I hope I'm wrong, but that's my prediction.
Yeah. My grades are actually completely the same. So Rhino is going to be a C for me, and Levia a D. I mean, for Levia, because we're grading these in the context of what they got from Everfest, I don't think she got much at all. Could she be a decent call into a Prism meta? Maybe, but I think Rhinar's better. So the thing about Levia is Levia is, it's good against Illusionists in the way you think it would be, but if you do end up rolling like a 1 or something below that, because I think you have to roll the scab skins a lot against Illusionists that's part of what makes you strong against them. Maybe you think I'm wrong, but I think that if you do roll that late game, Rhinar gets punished by, I don't know, getting hit by a Herald on the turn cycle after where your opponent goes, or gets an out or replaces them, where Levia has the possibility of taking 10, 15 blood debt. And I would rather be on Rhinar in that situation.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next class, we're going to Wizard. Brendan, Patrick of Volcor. This one is for you. I'm going to lead you in with some questions here on Wizard, and I'm going to let you do some talking on one of your favorite classes here. So, we talk about Kano. Of course, that's our Wizard right now. Where was Kano in the last class constructed meta?
It was a gimmick. It was not a good deck, and it stole a couple events. It won a couple events.
Italian Nationals.
And it won. There were some at the top tables, both in Vegas, so for Monarch meta, and in Tales of Aria at Orlando. There was some not too high in the tables, but decently high. In that meta, a lot of the Kano wins came from the opponents just not running Null Rune at all. And I thought, in my opinion, the fact that a Briar opponent could run 0 Null Rune and still beat Kano probably over the 50% delta is it kind of hurts. But with Everfest, I think we got a few more pieces to help us out with that situation in particular. Yeah,
so if we're look at Kano, right? If we take a step back before we even talk about Everfest, like what is Kano good at, and what is Kano not so good at, just in general, as a hero, as a player in the Flesh and Blood meta.
Yeah, so Kano is, I think, from a design standpoint, like one of the biggest or one of the best tools against like a degenerate control meta. I know that in the context of when Kano was originally printed, which was in a world with drone brutality, Kano was definitely like the theoretical counter to drone brutality. And yeah, I think that outside of being very good against control and also good against like hyper aggro that doesn't run enough cards to pitch against it, what I think it's best at, or what it has been best at in Classic Constructed, has just been surprising opponents and taking wins away because people don't know what it is, and they don't respect it. And yeah, I mean, I honestly think that a lot of the Kano wins were off the back of that. Although that's not 100% of it, of course. Before you yell at me for getting your couple Kano wins and Monarch Tails here.
good players playing these decks, right? Players that know the decks and know how to get wins with a deck that maybe isn't quite as favored in the meta. Okay, so Kano good at punishing potentially, like super controlling decks that you can set up these combos. You've got Stir Forked, you've got Blazing Ethers you can stack. You've got this big end game. You can always leak damage unless people are playing, Barrier 5 or whatever. What do we get from Everfest? Like, what are the cards that stand out in terms of looking to impact Classic Constructed for Kano?
Yeah, so the most important is Aether Wildfire. So we had some punishing effects before, right? Most notably in the form of Aether Flare, things like Blazing Ether. These cards would punish your opponent for not blocking, right? For not interacting with you. And like I said, it didn't really feel like it was enough because still some decks get away with it. With the addition of Aether Flare, that's now another multiplicative damage effect that Wizard can use that heavily punishes opponents that don't run Null Rune or just decide to not block that turn, dump their entire hand. So I think this addition of Aether Wildfire in particular is very, very good for Kano and Classic Constructed. That being said, Aether Wildfire is a bit harder to get off than I think we first appreciated. It's very expensive.
So is this a card you think goes in all Kano decks then?
No, I actually don't. Like, potentially, but I think that there's a Kano deck where you play... I don't know if the correct word would be low variance, but you don't really play off the top, right? You chip, and then set up some sort of combo turn, or just kill them on their turn when they overextend. That's actually my favorite way to play Kano, and I think you play that into, that's probably the better way to play Kano into, mid-range and control. But against aggressive decks, against decks that are not going to pitch to block arcane damage, I think this is a great option to have in the deck. Whether you have, a couple standard in the main board, I'm not sure yet. I haven't tested it enough, but for me, I think it's kind of sideboard.
Yeah, so the big kind of combo, right, is catching the opponent out, this into snap back into a Blazing Ether, right? That is the big one, right? Because you catch them with their pants down, you're coming in for, if you're able to pump as well, right, potentially maybe 6 with the nodes and the staff. Yeah, so coming in for 6, they've got their pants down, can't stop it, hit them for 6. Your snapback's coming in for 9. So that's 15, and then your Blazing Ether's coming in for 15 plus the original 6, so for 21. So that's a big turn. That's a lot of damage, but you've got to catch the opponent, as we say, with I'm going to keep saying with pants down. But that's a 3-card combo. Off the top you find the Blazing or the Wildfire, and then you use your boots for the other one. So it's not unthinkable, right? That is quite a powerful combo, and your opponent has to respect that, I think, now with Wildfire being in the format.
Yeah, so it's somewhat of a 3-card combo, right? It's a 3-card combo. Well, I guess it's not really a 3-card combo because you're going to need that extra resource for your boots, whether it's for Blazing or it's for Aether Wildfire.
Sure. So Wildfire plus the 2 pumps is 4 resources, right? 1 to play maybe the Blazing. Sorry, 1 to play the Wildfire. Sorry, right? Another 3 to hit the card on the top. So you're at 8. 1 for so 9 with a snapback. So yeah, it probably involves it's a 5-card hand, right? With Tunic, if whether or not you have Tunic. So
yeah, I see this most consistently as you have Aether Wildfire in your arsenal. Mm-hmm. You have Tunic up. You play
Draw
Tunic
snapback.
Yep, you have snapback in your hand. You pitch a blue. You play. This is without any pumps, right? So you can, if you have another blue, you're pumping all of this stuff with your Crucible and your Metacarpus notes. But if not, you play your blue. You activate the Storm Shrouders. You play your Aether Wildfire, pitching a blue. Then you play your snapback off of your Tunic, and then pitch your other blue to Kano the Blazing Ether off the top. So yeah, that's where I see it happening the most. And then if you have that extra blue to pump it up, I mean, you're right. It's a very good combo, but a bit specific. And I think it's very good against decks that are not going to pitch against you, where when decks are going to reserve resources or interact with your arcane damage, I think something like a Stir Forked is usually a better use of those Storm Shredders.
Yeah, so the way I see it is something like you maybe you Sonic Boom on your turn, or Aether Spindle red, and force them to Arcane Barrier on your turn, and then they come in with an attack on their turn, right? And are kind of guards are down. The other card, and I'm just going to skip to, I know this is later down, but let's talk about it now while we're talking about this, because I think this plays into this combo. Deja Vu Potion. If you have maybe the extra resources, or you have the Tunic counter up, and maybe you pitch the Blazing, then you can put it back on top with Deja Vu Potion, right, and set that combo up that way. So what's your sort of thoughts on Deja Vu, or Potion of Deja Vu, that was called? Deja Vu Potion.
Yeah, I think overall Deja Vu Potion is the most powerful wizard card we got in this set. There's so many.
Sorry, Potion of Deja Vu. Sorry.
Potion of Deja Vu. Yeah, I think that you can do the most degenerate things with Deja Vu Potion, but it's also just its use case, or at least its power floor is decently high, right? So like, I think in like a bad case scenario, you can be pitching if you've drawn quite a few reds, you pitch your red Voltic Bolt, then you Deja Vu Potion, put it on top, Kano it off, and boom, you're good to go. So like, I really like that for when you have those dead hands, or your opponent thinks they can get away with something when you have fewer cards in hand. And then of course, when you're going on like longer card combos, this is incredible. Like, it's so good for stacking Blazings as well. So I think this is the most powerful wizard card in the set.
The wizard non-wizard card. I think Potion of Deja Vu is really strong. I agree. I think it's one of the strongest cards that wizard gets in this format. One thing you have to consider is how many potions do you play. I actually think there's this big trap because there's also Potion of Clarity, which we can talk about. This is the Scry 2 one. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I think this one is good, but unfortunately not good enough that I want to be playing it, because I want to be playing 3 copies of Potion of Deja Vu, at least 2 probably, and I still want some number of energy potions because I want to be setting up these big turns. But maybe my sideboard now looks like I'm rotating in my potions. I'm a wizard player. I'm bringing different brews to different fights. So what's your thoughts on Clarity?
Well, it's a good question if Potion of Deja Vu is actually better than Energy Potion, because I think Energy Potion prior to the set was actually the most powerful wizard card, funny enough. So yeah, how many potions are you playing? Good question. I think that I'm with you in terms of I'm prioritizing Energy Potions and Deja Vu Potions before Clarity Potion. So the best way to articulate Clarity Potion, in my opinion, is if you look back at the Blitz meta in Season 2 of Skirmish, there was a somewhat geographical divide on wizards that would play Talismanic Lens and wizards that would play Arcanite Skullcap. And this was mostly Singapore and the APAC region, not including New Zealand, Australia, versus the US wizards. And obviously Skullcap is great. You start at 15 life. There's a lot of on-hit triggers in that format. It's particularly good against Prism. But I would still run the Talismanic Lens, because I maintain to this day, if you are not a YOLO off the top, and even if you are a YOLO off the top wizard, Talismanic Lens was so freaking strong. And it, that helped you get so many kills, right? Because you can, in somewhat bad case scenarios, you would Stir Fork somebody or get them decently low, and it wasn't actually enough to kill them. And then your key card to end up to killing them on their turn, and instead of just gambling off the top, was now cracking your Talismanic Lens. When your opponents would overextend into you, that's when you would crack your Talismanic Lens and really punish them. Because, if you blanked off the top in that situation, that's not good. So having this on demand via a potion, and I particularly like potions in Kano because you can Kano them off the top, super, super good. I think that I'm probably playing close to 9 potions. It's somewhat dependent on what you're playing against, but Yeah, it's a very good card.
I think one thing I was going to say, the reason I don't like as many potions is, and yeah, they're good at situational times off Kano, but sometimes they're bad off Kano when you're actually looking for damage. They're not good off Sonic Booms. They don't defend. I think there is a cost to them, so I'm looking somewhere between like 4 to 6 personally, but yeah, it could depend on the matchup and what you want to play into. I want to keep us moving, and I want to apologize for both of us butchering the names there of Potion of Deja Vu and Clarity Potion. They're opposite. We keep saying that the other ones. Brendan, what else interests you from the set? We've got to probably talk about Emerita Scolding, right?
Yeah, so Scolding is an interesting card. So this is... I don't know how I feel about Emerita Scolding. So as I thought about it quite a bit because we were playing that class constructed game where I was on Kano, and I think that Emerita Scolding doesn't really fit into how I like to play Kano, but I think that different ways of playing Kano, going off the top more, using Kano's ability more, whether that's more possible now because you have more information on the top of your deck with things like Potion of Clarity. This card is incredibly strong, but yeah, I like the blue. Right, I like the blue in particular because I feel like I get, an okay rate when I blank this as a blue on my opponent's turn or something like that. But yeah, Emerita Scolding is... I don't think my opinion on this is fully formed yet. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I like the blue. I'm not sure about the red yet. I think it's now the crazy thing with Everfest for all decks really is that slots are really starting to be congested, and you're not looking at cards as like, okay, this card's good. You're looking at like my game plan and how this card plays into it. And I think you hit the nail on the head of like how you're playing Kano and the strategy you're going for. Maybe this doesn't fit in, but maybe for other ways of playing Kano, or maybe there's a different strategy out there, or a new kind of build of Kano. Maybe this is really good. 6 damage is obviously phenomenal. Like, it's really strong. So I think it's going to depend. Other cards. I think this one is... We don't have to talk too long about this one. Kraken's Aether Vein.
Oh, it's good though.
Okay.
So the way to look at Kraken's Aether Vein is, like, imagine playing it on your turn, and like it just requires a card of your opponent to block it. And if they don't block it, it's instant, it's 1 damage, right? Which is not an incredible amount, but it replaces that. And yeah, then you're able to kind of keep playing your turns. So you can do this, you can ping for 1, and now you can Voltic Bolt or something like that, which doesn't sound incredible, right? It doesn't sound insane, but I think it's better than people get it credit for, because every time you activate Kraken's Aether Vein, you're asking your opponent the question of committing a card to do this. I mean, obviously there's things like Tunic and things like that, but over a longer game, I think that this stacks up. Like, if you get 3 activations out of this and Blitz 4 activations out of it, it's incredibly strong. So I think it's better than people get it credit for, because it does demand a card, especially when you play it on your turn. Obviously, if they do pitch that card and you come with something else, they can use the rest of whatever resources were available on that card to block whatever you come in with after it. But I like that the first equation that you present your opponent is, do you want to commit an entire card to 1 damage? Mm-hmm. So I think it's not incredible. Like, I don't know if I'm playing it over Crucible all the time, but I think there's a build of Kano where you can utilize this a bit better. And I think it can potentially give you a lot of control as the Kano player.
Yep. When I talk about this card, we talked about this in, of course, our preview card, Scour. Any different thoughts? We talked about this at length in the preview video, but do you think as you start to see the classic constructed format shape up, how do you think this card impacts Kano and its viability as a deck in this format?
Yeah, so definitely incredible against 0-cost auras, and of course token auras as well, which might be very relevant in the coming meta. That being said, I don't think that this is something that's going to swing that Prism matchup to be super favorable for Kano. I don't think it's powerful enough, just in the context of Heralds just wrecking you and things like Genesis existing. I do think that this is one of the core blues that a lot of Kano decks will be playing. I think a good way to evaluate blues in Kano is, like, am I playing this blue in Blitz, right? Because you can't swap them in and out, and I think that this would be a stock blue for me in Blitz, because when it's good, it's really, really good, and it does hit a lot more than you might think when you first see it, right? We're talking about Chain Shackles, Seismic Surge tokens, Briar embodiments, which, not relevant unless it's the embodiment of Lightning if you're playing Kano, but yeah, it's a really good blue, and I think it's a great addition to the deck.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Any other cards you want to talk about before we move on to our next, or I guess just wrapping up Kano? Any other sort of cards you want to talk about in Everfest?
Not really. I mean, there's something we said about Sigil Parapets. Like that could particularly be quite a good card. I know specifically in Blitz, I probably would consider trying out this card, but that's one of those ones I feel like I have to test more before I feel comfortable, kind of getting a full evaluation on it.
It's not written on the card how good it might be. There could be a bunch of different lines where it becomes better than we think, and a different way to play Kano that we just talked about could see that happen. So we talked about some of the cards. We talked about archetypes in this format. Where do you see Kano sort of falling in this format in terms of what's it going to be good against? What's it, where's it going to kind of stand? When would you play this? When would you not play it?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I actually think he still really struggles in a Prism meta almost more than any other. So WoW Scour is a great addition to the deck. I don't think that Kano's what I'm picking up to combat Prism, and maybe even Bravo Star of the Show. Bravo potentially different because the popular deck of Bravo Star of the Show is actually quite card hungry, but could switch to more of a chip game plan and then picking its time to explode on you if it's playing against Kano. So I think that it's not in a fantastic spot, but we have a lot of tools here, and Wizard is just like a historically very complicated class to kind of look at, evaluate, and figure out. Like it is Kano was probably most powerful in Arcane Rising, and it's for the collective entire community of Flesh and Blood to unlock his power in Blitz. So I think that that kind of goes to speak. But yeah, this meta, it's not my first pick.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot beneath the surface, and I think we're going to see Kano at some point, I wouldn't say break out, but have its time at an event in this format. I think it's complicated. There's some stuff that can be done there, and I think you can tune it in a way that maybe you play slightly differently. Opponents don't know how to play against that. I think it will make an impact at some point in this format. I just don't think it's going to be top tier. I don't think this deck will all of a sudden become one of the best decks in the format. So if we jump to grading, I'm probably giving Kano a C+. I think some really great tools. I think Kano gets a bump. I think the meta to start with might be tough for Kano, but yeah, I think there's something there, and we're going to see Kano be around at least the fringes, if not more, in this format.
I'm going to give him a B-, slightly to be contrarian, but also because it doesn't take a lot, right? Like I said, it is very hard to evaluate Kano on, just at a glance. I think you need a lot of testing and a lot of time, and could potentially find some interactions or some ways of playing that hero that make him very, very strong. And when he does, like, there's a fine line that I think he exists under right now. And as soon as he breaks out over that, there's no like middle ground, right? He's either down here or he's like way up here. So I think it's fragile, and we got a lot of cool cards to work with. So B- for me.
Cool. Let's move on to Ninja. If we talk about where Ninja was in the last meta, really fell out of favor. Monarch meta, we saw Ninja start strong. We saw Ninja Control in a big way do well, won the first PTI event, and then was like prevalent through the road to national season to start with. We saw aggressive decks then become a bit more of the flavor as it just became impossible to line up against Chain with that sort of control deck. And then Tales of Aria comes out, and Ninja just kind of falls off the radar, right? Like there was a bit of aggro to start the format with, and then kind of nothing from Katsu. Just really struggled into, the aggressive decks couldn't line up well enough into Briar because of embodiments. You just swung back turns, you took damage to try and come with your on-hit effects, and all of a sudden Briar was out defending you. The control decks were just done better with ult time and even dash. So I think Ninja and Katsu, of course, struggled in that previous format. But one thing that, the things that Katsu is good at is Katsu has great on-hit effects in terms of the combo lines. Mask is always a threat. Mask momentum is one of your biggest strengths, right? You have the Lord of Wind combo. You have new combo lines as well, and you have just good damage as well with like the kick line as well, while you're still presenting on-hit effects of Mask. Plus you have the Kadachis for like that long-term game. So it always feels to me like Katsu is always an option. It just depends, what's kind of around it and how you build it to try and combat what's happening in the meta.
Yeah, I felt like stacking embodiments of Earth pre-errata were particularly oppressive against Katsu, because you could you could still you could let Katsu kind of come back at you, hit you with the Kadachis, maybe a Kadachi in the first attack, the Surging Strike, and then you could sometimes easily block out the Whelming, like the key card. Yeah. So I felt like the Briar really kept that deck out of the meta, but in Monarch it was probably the second most popular aggro deck, and I think it was a lot more powerful than people gave it credit for because Chain really hated blocking. But yeah, I think with the errata of Briar, and of course the additions of some of these new cards, Katsu's definitely back on the menu, especially in a Prism meta. I think that Katsu has a pretty good time clearing auras. So if we're gonna have an aura, heavy aura-based Prism meta, Katsu's something to look at, in my opinion.
It's funny. I think in the Monarch meta, initially it felt like a terrible match for Katsu because all the builds were like Herald based, and it was like, you can't pop the Heralds and their damage is better, and then they can still defend reasonably well. And then as we shifted towards more auras, the Katsu aggro deck became, as you say, better. And I think, yeah, you're right. It probably going to have a good time into these decks. So if we look at where, I guess, cards now for Ninja and Everfest, let's start with Breaktide, which is this is the Majestic that follows on from the Rushing River or Flood of Force combo line. So it says if Rushing River or Flood of Force was the last attack of this combat chain, Breaktide gets +3 and Dominate. And when Breaktide hits, banish the top card of your deck until the end of your next turn. So don't have to play it this turn, next turn. You may play it. It's a yellow pitch, which is I really like. That's the Flood of Force kind of line, is that yellow pitch. Defends 3, attacks for 2. So with the Dominate, comes in for 5 and has that on effect, which is, I think, really strong. I think this card is really good. I think Flood of Force felt really awkward to play. But now we have more cards that play into that Flood of Force line. Rushing River is still, strong. Torrent of Tempo is a good card. You want to play in most Ninja decks anyway. And now you just have a way to make that line better with this card, Breaktide, which is, effectively on the combo is 5, Dominate, on hit, draw a card, except that you can play that card for multiple turns. It's like an extra arsenal for 2 turns, which is really strong. And of course, if it's on top of the Flood of Force or the Rushing River, you know what the card is because you've put it back on top. So, I really like this card.
Yeah, I think that, like what you said, the effect is super powerful. Banishing that card and being able to play it on your following turn, so generating advantage on the turn after you've already hit them with a 5 Dominate. And of course, all the prerequisites to pulling off this combo. Very, very strong. My caveat with evaluating this card is just, I can evaluate the Flood of Force combo from like a theory perspective, but I haven't played that combo line myself almost ever. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, I think with Ninja, there's a lot of feel to it, right? And I just don't know exactly what it's like to try to pull off that combo consistently. So the power level for me with this card is a little bit ambiguous, and it just depends, what is it like to run the Flood of Force line consistently rather than, maybe the leg tap line. Probably not the Surging line because that one is ridiculous, but you know what I mean?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, this could be a completely different deck, and you're right. It's kind of restricted by the power of this. Can be as it can be as high as this, but it's kind of restricted by what happens before it when you put combo on a card, especially when you need 2 combo. You need 2 cards to come before it. So it's interesting. I think the deck probably looks different, to be honest. This Rushing River Flood of Force line. I will say that one of the cool things you can do with this is you can set up the card for next turn. So say you draw up the cards with Rushing River, you put the cards back on top. The card you banish with Breaktide, you might not want to play this turn, but it might be a combo card to set up for next turn. It could be a Crane Dance for your Soulbead Strike the following turn, or what, there's things you could do, right? So I do like that aspect of Breaktide. I want to talk about 100 wins because I think this rare cycle of cards is really interesting. So 100 wins is the 0 cost combo card. It says if 100 wins is the last attack this combat chain, this attack gains +1 for each other card named 100 wins you control on the combat chain. So they build on each other, and they all have natural go again. 3 attack at red, 2 at yellow, 1 at blue, and defend for 2. I think this line is super interesting. I just think it's whether it's going to be powerful enough. Obviously, this allows you to go wider, get the buff effects. Things that spring to mind is like, how can you maybe use this with like a belittle line and with potential some non-attack actions. I think this is the one that interests me the most. It's just whether it's going to be powerful enough to be the strong aggro deck that this feels like you want to be building with these cards.
Yeah, so at this point, I've played against it a few times, and it does seem super powerful. Like combo with Go Again is particularly nice because basically when this hits, you're able to Katsu, or when your first attack action is, you can Katsu for one of them, potentially Katsu for another. It also interacts with breaking scales in a pretty annoying way. So you go Kadachi, 100 wins. That's a little bit tilting for the opponent. Obviously, you can only do it once a game, but yeah, I think it's very powerful. Combo cards with Go Again. I think particularly the red one, like this, the power floor is very high, right? Where you're Katsuing out a card that does nothing in your hand, and you're grabbing something that's 3 with Go Again. Contextual to what Katsu does with having something like Mask of Momentum and being rewarded for going wide most of the time. I think this card is very, very good.
And then, of course, you have...
The blue's good, too.
Yeah. I could even see starting with 9 and then maybe working out where you go from there because, like you say, there's ways to search them up. But then, of course, you have 100 wins. Sorry, Winds of Eternity, which combos off of 100 wins. So it's a blue, 0 cost, 3 defense, 2 attack. It says combo of 100 wins was the last attack this combat chain. Winds of Eternity gains +2, and when this hits, shuffle all cards named 100 wins you own on the combat chain into your deck. So Winds of Eternity can be searched up with one of the cards played on. Maybe you've played 200 wins this turn. You can pop them back into your deck, shuffle. This is coming in for 4 as well at blue. It feels like a good, it's already a blue, which is base, just good for your deck, right? And then adds on to this 100 wins combo in a pretty good way that allows you to keep density in your deck, which can often be a problem for really hyper-aggressive ninja decks in certain formats. And also just be a good attack on the end of it. So I think this is a nice combo finisher for the 100 wins line.
Blue card that blocks for 3 and potentially is 4. Actually, often is 4 if you're playing a few hundred wins, and helps you recycle threat density. I think this is the best card that Ninja got this set, and the best card Ninja's had gotten in a long time. Like this card is, in my opinion, it's incredible. Because if you've ever played longer games, Ninja, Katsu, specifically against control, maybe even mid-range, you start to run out of threats, and that's pretty bad. So the effect of this is definitely, it's more powerful than it looks when you first read it, and a blue that, if you're playing 900 wins that are coming in 4, that's very good. Worst case scenario, it's blocking for 3, and it's also pitching for your Kadachis. That's a good card.
Yep. There's a couple of cards I want to just briefly touch on before we talk about one of the most important cards I think Ninja gets in this format, which isn't a Ninja card. But Mask of Pouncing Links first. I think Mask of Momentum is just too powerful to not be playing in classic constructed Ninja decks, but there could very well be this hyper-aggressive deck that's less focused on the on-hit effects and more just on pure damage, and that's where Mask of the Pouncing Links might come into play for these kind of really important, this one important turn. I'm not thrilled about it. I think Mask of Momentum's too strong. And then Twin Twisters is a card that I think is kind of piques my interest a little bit. This ability to choose one of 2 abilities, either +1 to the Twin Twisters or to the next attack. Really good for breakpoints, and probably fits into a because it's the next attack. It's not attack action or ninja attack action or combo card or whatever. It's a lot more flexible. Probably plays into these ninja decks that maybe want to play less ninja cards and more just like good generics and things like that, which is quite cool with this effect. You could play this with Go Again into a Snatch for 5, for instance, which I think is quite cool.
Yeah, I think Twin Twisters is really good. In terms of Pouncing Links, I don't know. It's hard to evaluate. Maybe in like a super hyper aggressive matchup. And of course, outside of that, like a specific use case where you're abusing this effect to search out a card that's, core to whatever broken combo or game plan that has been developed. But yeah, Mask of Momentum is just so freaking powerful. So hard to say, but I actually think Twin Twisters is very, very good. The ability to give that next one +1. I just love modal abilities, especially when both are super relevant. I think, so either +1 on this, making it 1 for 4, or making the next one +1, and you can make that next card something particularly nasty, right? Command and Conquer for 7. Ninja still does that. So Twin Twisters into Command and Conquer, pretty annoying. I really like it.
Yep, I think the card is good, and I'm excited to play with it. Just lastly on Pouncing, Mask of Pouncing Links, I think, clearly a good card in Benji. Great that we have a budget option to Mask of Momentum. You could say, well, how often in a game does Mask of Momentum hit? But it's always the threat of that card. So, yeah, that's the thing. So, even bigger than that, we've got to talk about this card because I think this might be the best card that Ninja's gotten in this set. I know you labeled a couple there as maybe the best cards with Winds of Eternity. even bigger than that is very, very strong. You can trigger this off Kodachi. This is the 0 cost generic instant, op 3, and then if you've dealt, how's it read? If the attack is greater than the amount of damage you've done this turn, or on that attack, sorry, you get the card. We draw a card. Create a quicken token, draw a card. Sorry. Really powerful effect, right? So a lot of attack actions in Ninja. Kodachi is always coming in threatening this card. Usually it's often always correct to take that first Kodachi. So even bigger than that is going to be really easy to trigger and get off unless your opponent is actively trying to play around it, which is also just good for you because it means they're blocking Kodachis. And then if you keep your density of attack actions high, which you want to in Ninja anyway, this card is very strong. And that quicken token is good when you're also playing cards, that maybe don't have natural go again, like the Rushing River line with Torrent Tempo and Soulbeat Strike maybe on the Crane Dance line. The quicken with Snatch is always fantastic. I think this card is great. I think this might be one of the best cards that we get.
Yeah, it is very, very powerful. Like some of these additions to Ninja are really pushing it over the line for me as a potential choice for early in this meta. Because as Plunder Run has been taken out of the format, I think aggro decks are probably most aggro decks universally suffer from that. But with some of the tools that Ninja's getting, I wonder if they can compensate for the loss of Plunder Run there. And this one in particular. I know when you're playing against it, you're just like, oh man, every time they drop it, okay, at least there's only 2 more left or something like that. I do maintain that I think Winds of Eternity is the most impactful card that Wizard is getting this set, at least.
Ninja, you mean?
Yeah, Ninja Wizard. It's a
very
dagger wizard.
can see the mix up there. So I just want to kind of wrap up Ninja. I think my concern with Ninja in this format is, does it have enough? Does it have enough to be the premier aggressive deck? Does it have enough to be the premier kind of on-hit effect deck that's really difficult to, almost reminds me of Dorinthia early in Flesh and Blood, the deck that's hard to defend against, the deck that has these tricks. Is this what we're going to see with Ninja? I don't know. I have a bit of reservation about that. I haven't tested it a whole heap yet, so really just going off what I know previously and what I think these cards do as an impact. Some people have told me, sort of anecdotally, that the deck feels powerful, that even bigger than that is very strong, that there's some really cool lines, but does it quite have that edge that it needs to get over the line? Not quite sure. I think we're going to see this play really well into certain metagames. I think now your prison matchup is good. I think you're really good into brutes. I think if you were still expecting a bunch of old times and guardians, it could be tough. But I will be interested to see where Ninja is. If I was to wrap it up, Brendan, and give it a grade, I'm probably going to give it a B-. I think I had it like a C+, but I think I'm going to bump it up to a B-. I think these cards are powerful. I think there's something there, and I think we're going to see Ninja be in this format and be a threat at different events as we go forward.
So I'm not sure how bad the Plunder Run ban is for Ninja, but for me it's an A-. I think that Ninja is going to be the premier low to the ground, go wide aggro deck, and can be a particularly good meta call, as things like Old Him and Traditional Bravo are really going to struggle into all these Prism Auras. So it's an A- for me. I think Ninja got incredible cards of this set, and yeah, it's a powerful deck.
Cool. All right, there you have it. Brendan thinks Ninja's going to be powerful. I think it could be, and we'll see what happens. All right, Brendan, so we have 3 more classes to cover, but we're not going to do it today. Initially, our thought was 2-parter, go through the classes. There's a lot of cards in Everfest. There's a lot to discuss, and we don't want to shortchange any of the classes, and we also don't want to run for 2+ hours. So what we're going to do next week is we're going to come back and we're going to cover Warrior, Ranger, and Illusionist, which I'm sure people have been holding out for. We're hoping to hear this week, but we're going to talk about it as kind of, we think it really is what's going to impact this format early on, at least. So maybe we'll be wrong by the time we get to the 3rd week of Everfest, but let's talk about it next week. What we're going to do in conjunction with that is we're going to take some questions on the format. So if you've got any questions that you would like us to answer about the format, drop it in the comments below, tweet at us. I'm going to put a tweet out as well. Brendan's going to retweet it for me. And we'll talk a little bit about some questions that people might have on this format that maybe we haven't covered in the first 2 parts of this discussion on Everfest, that's less related to classes and more about the format. So that's next week. Before we drop off, Brendan, want to just plug a couple of things. Want to say you can find us on Twitter. Brendan is at BrendanAPG. I'm at Fian_Dale. And if you are not aware of our Patreon, we do have a Patreon where we post deck techs, deck guides that go along with our deck techs on YouTube. Of course, we have the gameplays up on YouTube. We have an extra monthly podcast. We do have a Discord for our community as well that you can join in if you're a patron. Otherwise, Brendan, we'll see you next week when we finish out Everfest and Classic Constructed.
See you next time.